really delighted to be here. How many of you work in companies? How many of you are in organizations slogging away trying to change culture? Okay, and the rest are primarily external consultants that work with organizations, so we all have a lot of collective experiences. Well, I've been in this field and in this business for quite a long time, and I've always been attracted to organizational change and organizational development. And I told Quentin this story a while ago. I actually started out with the aluminum company of America, Alcoa, and it was a very interesting time where diversity, women, anybody who wasn't white male probably wasn't going to do real good in in this company anywhere. And I started realizing what the disparities and kind of the inequities of the workplace were. And I then moved into a labor union, which I'm sharing this story because it really helped shape where I ended up and where I am today. I think it's one of those critical pieces. And I began to see that leader and supervisor behavior really was a critical component of what some of the dysfunctional activities are that go on in the workplace. And I represented employees, and I would see over and over again continued grievances. And it wasn't because the managers were bad or the leaders were bad or they wanted to be bad or hurt. It's because of human nature, and they did not know how to lead and supervise and be effective managers. And I then subsequently learned that you cannot organize a well-led company. So if you look at it today, you will see that the really well-led, well-managed companies do not have as much labor management activity as others, simply because the need for having a healthy, constructive workforce is understood on the part of the leaders and is expected and required, measured, and tracked within their organization. So it was that experience that really caused me to go work on the management side and begin to try and work with leaders of organizations to help them be more constructive in how they dealt with others, more humanistic, more participative, rather than the classic command and control leaders of the industrial age. Now, the challenge has been that while in our hearts most leaders do want to, if you ask them, and I think the human synergistic tool was very enlightening for me on that point, if you ask them what the ideal leadership style is, they will all just about tell you, for those of you that know the tool, and I suspect everybody in this room knows the tools, right? Okay. If you ask them, they will almost always tell you that it's a constructive style. That's what they want. But they are ill-equipped in many ways when the pressures of the day-to-day tasks push them back into a command and control kind of situation. And I do think that the prevailing leadership style still is a command and control style. And that's what caused me and my partner, we went to graduate school together, we got our PhDs together, and we got very interested in doing research that matters around human capital and around people. And we believe, and we have subsequently proved, that as much rigor that goes into understanding finance, marketing, strategy in organizations can also be applied to people. But for some reason, people in the human resource field or organizational development field don't apply that same kind of rigor. And as a result of that, very often are considered soft. How does this relate to the bottom line? You know, why is it that if I have a management group that really is aggressive defensive, how is that impact? Why should I even care? Well, there's lots of reasons why you should care. Companies spend huge amounts of money on learning and development. They spend huge amount of money on performance management systems. They spend huge amount of money on talent management systems, data analysis. They don't do a lot of data analysis, surprisingly enough. They do a lot of, you know, SAP, PeopleSoft, all of these kinds of things to capture data on their talent, but they're not doing things that are integrated, that really inform how these activities are in fact changing and impacting the business outcomes. And therein lies the flaw in our field. And that is why I am so attracted to the human synergistics tools. Now, just to add to this, I was in a brokerage house, a Wall Street brokerage house. I was the head of leadership and organization development for this company many years ago when I was getting my PhD. And it was really interesting. The company was very concerned that their employee surveys were so negative. They kept sending them out year after year, and they got really terrible scores around leadership. They didn't trust the leaders. They felt the leaders were really aggressive. They didn't get any feedback. And yet when you walked into the company, it said, you know, we're a team, we value collaboration, we're innovative, we walk, right? Don't we see this all the time? And there is nobody in this company that's saying, well, this is what you're saying. What are the behaviors that are associated with these wonderful platitudes? And are you, in fact, operating in a way that supports that? Now, it sounds so simple today because we're so much more sophisticated. And, you know, we used to say, leaders don't walk the talk. And you talk to senior leaders and say, you're not walking the talk. And people couldn't quantify that. So we did an organization culture inventory. And interestingly enough, it was very clear that the leaders were not operating and did not had behaviors that were quite contrary to those words. And I brought it back as an experiment, shared it with them. I thought they were going to fire me on the spot because, of course, they were very aggressive defensive. And I said, stop. Look what you're doing. You know, you're doing exactly what this survey says you do. And it was a real wake-up call. And I learned a very big lesson from that. I said, you know, you can continue operating as you are. That's fine. Then take down the slogan. Be authentic to who you are. Tell people, you come work here, we're going to work you to death for 5 years, 3 years, you'll get a great resume, you'll make a lot of money, you'll be burned out, you'll go move on. At least be truthful about it. Or say, we're not here, and we're trying to get here. And put in place strategies that will really begin to move you forward. Now, the interesting part of this story is, this was the most expensive brokerage house in Wall Street, meaning its turnover rate was 35%. Now think about that. Any company that has a turnover rate of leaders at 35%, what are managers doing every day? They're filling jobs, because a third of their workforce is not there. And then another third of their workforce is up a learning curve, trying to figure out how to get things done around here. And guess what happens? When you've got half your people trying to figure out how to get things done around here, you have a lot of waste, a lot of error, a lot of cost, and a lot of customer dissatisfaction because there are no consistent processes within the organization. So this, of course, was true. The organization had terrible failure rates. Now, in a financial institution, for any of you that work with finance institutions, you know that you pay huge penalties if trades are not done correctly, if FX is not done correctly, if all these kinds of things. And it was quite a problem. The company no longer exists. It was bought out by someone else. And so I do think that that's the mantra of not paying attention to what leaders do and the kind of culture that you create. So I went on with GE and did talent and all these other kinds of things there, and then became the head of people development for Hewlett-Packard and put in place a whole talent and holistic system and for organizations there. And decided when I ran into Marshall and we reconnected again to take my next step, which was to join and become an organizational consultant. And a partner of mine, we went to school together, I told you, sat back and said, why is it that people talk about talent, people talk about human capital systems, but nobody's cracked the code around what really works? So we sat down and we put together a model based on, and I will just share it with you here. It's a little further ahead in this deck. But we put together a model. Now this model is based on, just so that you know, It didn't translate well from my computer to here, so it's a little misaligned. But, and we looked at, now, what are the critical elements? Why do people struggle so much connecting the dots to have a whole systems approach to talent? And we said, well, there's two main reasons. Leadership engagement, absolutely critical. And the second main reason is organizational culture. The invisible things that go on in the organization, like the brokerage house example that I was telling you. They could have kept spinning their wheels with compensation, performance systems, training, development. It was not going to change the way that company functioned until they began to really understand what the leaders were doing every day and the kind of culture that it was creating. And then we looked at, what's the operating system? What do all companies have that needs to be aligned? And we said, you got to have a strategy. But you've got to understand that strategy in terms of people. What does that mean for the people that I have? What does it mean for the skill sets of the people that I have? Do I have people who are functioning well today, in today's market? Maybe are functioning well in yesterday's market and really aren't prepared for today? Or do I have people that are going to be prepared for 2 or 3 years out in terms of market expansion? And I don't know a company alive that isn't thinking about growth. And the direct connection between growth and your leadership talent is obvious. But unless you understand what your business strategy is and what it's dictating for the skill sets that you require, you're not going to know whether you have the talent that can really compete down the road. So our premise was you needed to have a clear strategy, and then you needed to understand your talent against that strategy in a very specific way. What are the skill sets that my talent has? What are the skill sets that's going to be required? And what's the gap? And I will tell you, most organizations don't do that. When they do assessments, they do assessments either of top talent, they do assessments of people that are going to training programs. They use assessments as development instruments. They may use them sporadically as hiring instruments. What we did at HP, which was I don't know any other company around that's done it. We took the business strategy and we said, what is it that we really need? And then we developed a framework for leader skill sets. And it was a clear, simple one, because again, many companies have competency models that just most leaders look at and they want to throw up. You know, like, what is this? You know, I don't understand it. Well, if you're at this level, you have to have these competencies. If you're a supervisor, take all the noise out of the system. What do we need leaders to do, and what are they doing today? And get a simple, defensible model around that. And we assessed all of our executives. Now, I understand most companies cannot have the money and the resources to do that. I fortunately had a CEO that was very interested in doing that smartly. Because what we discovered, we assessed all 750 vice presidents, then we assessed all 2,500 directors, and we got a very clear picture. And the importance of that picture was phenomenal. In terms of the leaders that we were looking for the future, we didn't have as many as we needed to have for the growth equation that we had signed up for. And there were pockets within the company that we also were able to find out that had certain functions that just really were not up to speed from a contemporary point of view. Marketing department, perfect example. We had a marketing department that leveraged news outlets, printed media, but didn't know how to leverage digital media. Now, today's day and age, if you're in marketing and you don't know about digital media and you don't know how to leverage that and leverage social networks, you know, and we're a high-tech company, the largest high-tech company in the world, you know, it's kind of sort of no-brainer, but had to retool. So it gave you a lot of really concrete information that linked talent directly to the business strategy. This was a huge eye-opener for the business leaders. It also took all the noise out of the system, because you know how executives are, well, my team is better than your team, and you know, I have all the smart talent. Well, then you do a thorough assessment and you begin to look and you say, well, actually your teams are both the same. And you have some gaps here and you have some gaps here. And then what are you going to do about it? And it gives you the leverage in the data to really align your learning and development strategies. Now, the biggest takeaway that I have from all of this, and it's all written in the book, but Most human resource departments, unfortunately, we've researched this thoroughly with the top 100 biggest companies in the world in all sectors, operate still very much as silos. So these pieces are often disconnected. What happens in leadership development or with the executives doesn't necessarily filter into the ongoing training and development. You have silo training and development shops that are not necessarily talking and linked with strategy. You have performance management systems. Some reward behaviors, some don't reward behaviors, some strictly reward outcomes. Sometimes what's said in the talent reviews of people is not the same message that's sent in the performance review system. So you don't have a holistic approach to people that's going to drive, at the end of the day, your business outcomes. And I will tell you, when we did our interviews of CEOs, the biggest thing on most CEOs' minds of significant companies is, am I going to have the talent to compete? And they rely on their human resource departments to give them that answer. And very few departments can. And we were able to do that at HP. We were able to say, here's our best talent, a little coaching, and these people can be phenomenal. Here are the people that need some development, and these are the specific areas where we need development. And we were able to give them some training and development in a variety of different ways, either through movement, mentoring, again, coaching, not all just classroom training, some action learning experiences, etc. Here are the people that are sort of the stable of the organization, that are going to be great people. They need some kind of development, but we're not going to be investing a huge amount of money. And here are some people that simply in this culture or this organization are simply not going to make it. And it was very clear because we had a clear defensible assessment. It was done by an outside organization. And we were able then to segment our talent population collectively like you would customers. You know, there isn't a company alive that doesn't have, you know, a customer segmentation plan, doesn't understand what drives customer loyalty in certain pockets, etc. Why we don't do that around people is just astounding to me, because it takes energy, it takes effort, it takes a lot of thought, but you can do it. Once you've done that, then you're really able to correlate. We were able to look at who are the people that we're really rewarding here, and what are we rewarding. And shockingly enough, I'm now not talking about HP, shockingly enough, many companies would like to say that they're rewarding great leaders, but when they look at it, they're rewarding people who are strictly people who execute, to the exclusion of people-related skills. Now, if you're rewarding just people who can drive execution, what kind of culture do you think you're going to get? Right? It's going to be an aggressive defensive culture, most likely, right? And then what do you think happens with the learning and development? Do you think any learning and development is really going to take hold in a company that totally values execution? It's not going to value development. Yet these companies have huge training departments. Do you know what the most big companies spend a year on training? A lot of them don't actually track it, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $22 million as a general rule. That's on the radar screen. Now, when I came into HP, we said we didn't do a lot of coaching. Well, by the way, we did a lot of coaching, but it was all under the radar screen. Some guy stuck it in his P&L, or it ended up being this or that or whatever, and we had like 10,000 consultants running around doing all sorts of different coaching, none of it consistent. God only knows what they were coaching people around for, where it was going to take, and if it ever got measured, and if they ever got better, and who knew. So, you know, I mean, there is a lot of waste at a time, but so this is a way to really drive focus. The other thing that we found is a total, like I said, disconnect with the performance management system. So if you know where you're headed in terms of your leadership skills, the kind of culture you're trying to create, what you have, you're also able to look at what are your best leaders doing that create engagement. And you're able to prove that. You're able to correlate that directly. These leaders have these engagement scores. And oh, by the way, how are they doing in the marketplace? Now, we found out that where leaders drive constructive cultures, where they have high engagement, where they are personally involved, don't delegate this to human resource professionals, they are highly engaged, they tend to have, and did have, substantially better business outcomes in terms of less turnover, higher engagement scores, lower costs, and better business results, meaning they outperformed their peers in other departments consistently. Now, you can't prove that unless you use a systematic approach to developing talent. And it still strikes me as a really shocking thing that, you know, in every other part of a company, you would have a very sophisticated, clear strategy. And we don't do it around people. And part of that, I think, is us. Because many human resource people don't know how to do it, are not trained to do it, and still are measuring things that really don't matter at the end of the day to a CEO. And I think these business results and business outcomes to come in and show, we were just talking about recruitment. If you do a talent system well, you can cut your recruitment costs back by well over 50%. Do you know that most outside hires flame out after 18 months? And the reason that they flame out is because not because they weren't brilliant, not because they didn't have a fabulous pedigree, they didn't fit in the organizational culture. So a company that's smart and really uses a human capital or talent strategy well, what they do is that they really have succession plans that they use, and that when jobs are open, they have immediately people quickly to move into those jobs, and they move talent around. Now, what do you think that does for talent? A, that says to the people in the organization, I have a career here. You know, I'm not just stuck in a dead job. I have places to go, and people are paying attention, which is directly correlated to retention, by the way. We did exit interviews and found that employees that we did not want to leave the company, we said after, we used an outside organization, because we all know, and everybody in this room ought to know, that exit interviews done by internal people on the day that somebody is leaving are not valid and reliable. Because everybody will tell you, oh, well, I just got such a great offer. You know, the truth is they either hated their boss, you know, they never got talked to, they had no idea that anybody was ever paying any attention to their career or valued them at all. Well, lo and behold, 6 months after, we went back to all of these people and said, why'd you leave? And we used a private company to do it. Lo and behold, didn't like my boss, no career advancement. Not one person talked to me about my career in this company. Now, how simple is that? To have a conversation. You do performance reviews at least once a year with somebody, at least talk about once a year, you know, whether you're going to have a career opportunity or not. And then we looked at what are the capabilities of human resource talent. And this was, you know, really shocking to me, and it's not an indictment of human resource talent, but we're focusing on the wrong things from a human resource perspective. We do not have human resource leaders that know how to coach. We do not have human resource leaders that know how to effectively assess talent. We do not have human resource leaders that know how to have conversations around business in many cases. Now, this is broad brush, so, you know, many people will, but not as a collective group. We don't have human resource leaders who understand the organizational culture and can help a leadership team see the culture and understand the impact that it's going to have on their business results. And we don't have human resource people who know how to do data analytics that I just talked to you about, who are able to prove if you do this, you get this. If you do this, you're going to get this. Now, if you want to keep doing this, that's fine, but, you know, understand what you're doing and understand what, you know, what the outcomes and the results are going to give you. So I will ratchet forward. Paul and I put together this model, and it's, I don't know if you know this, it's a United States thing, but it's Malcolm Baldrige Award. It's for really excellent companies. Well, this is patterned after a whole systems Malcolm Baldrige kind of perspective. So we put a survey together around this. And then we went out and we piloted the survey, then we did interviews, then we surveyed over 500 Fortune 1000 companies. And then we did some correlational analysis. And we found out, lo and behold, this system is totally valid and reliable. And it is, in fact, a statistically valid approach to developing a whole systems talent view. And then we began to benchmark other companies against this. Now, unfortunately, there were only a very small number of companies which are in the top quartile. However, those companies that are in the top quartile using this whole system approach, they are also the companies who are best companies to work for, most admired companies, best companies for leaders, and by the way, their stock price is 33% higher than the people that are in the bottom quartile here. Now, there are many more people in the bottom quartile than there are in the top quartile, and these were even companies that through this very difficult financial time, while their stock may have dropped during this time, the stock dropped much less, considerably less than those companies that were in the bottom quartile. So it's significant. Somebody else asked me the other day and said, what is it that, there's all these things that go on in a workplace. So how can you account for all the different activities to say that this talent system really works? Well, we tested that too. And this talent system accounts for 55% of the variance in any one of your programs worldwide. And we can look at and tell you exactly what you're doing that's driving effective results and exactly what you're doing that's not going to get you anywhere. And let me give you a perfect example. I run a network of major companies around the world for human resource professionals and talent professionals. And we had a big conversation about this. And we went through the survey, and then I said, where do you spend your time? Now, it just so happens, I think I have this chart here. It just so happens, here we go. So you can see, this is the statistical correlation analysis, and you can see that every one of these items are important. So you have to have every one of these items. But the two most important items are supportive culture, strategic alignment, and these top four are the critical levers. Now, when you look at the elements within these critical levers, they're very specific. That leadership development is designed to close the gaps, that there's coaching used, organizations that use effective coaching models. In fact, their salespeople outperform by by 26%, where we've measured this, where we've looked at sales forces, about 1,800 sales leaders around the world. So it's significant. So look at this. This is the rank. Now, it doesn't mean that performance management is not important. My partner and I who wrote the book went back and forth around that, because I'd say throw the damn performance management systems out. It causes more trouble than it's worth. And, do these things and you'll get more business results. He says, well, statistically, it is valuable. You go and ask human resource professionals, OD professionals, et cetera, where do they spend their time? Polar opposite. Polar opposite. Here, talent assessments, meaning talent reviews. And our definition of talent assessment here is much broader than just doing, the once a year 9-box, 4-box ranking, whatever it is that you do. That's performance versus potential, and I will tell you, unless you do thorough assessments of your talent and you have a clear leadership framework, you can't judge potential. You've got somebody's, gut feel of, what your potential is, for your potential versus my potential, and somebody was telling me last night at dinner that the worst thing that happens, and I've seen this a million times, somebody gets rated as a top performer by some business leader, the business leader leaves, the new guy or gal comes in, and the next week you're a slug. That's because they didn't have consistent criteria and language around which to make judgments around performance and potential. And when you don't have that, who pays for that? The company and the people. So, incredible. The other area where people spent a lot of time was in this talent data analytics. But it's not, if you look at the questions, it's around talent storage. Data storage. Companies are spending huge amount of time. Do I get SAP? Do I get PeopleSoft? Do I get Taleo? Whatever it is. and then they capture all this data on people. But they don't do any kind of real correlation analytics. What's it telling you about the activities that you're taking, and are these activities really driving the kinds of end results that you're looking for? So we found that absolutely alarming. Then we took another look and we said, okay, if you improve your performance management system, because most companies are spending all this time on performance management systems, if you improve your performance management system by 10%, what happens to your business outcomes from a statistical point of view? Nothing. Nada. If you improve your culture by 10%, you improve your business outcomes commensurately. So what does that tell you? That's a pretty important aspect to think about. So Paul and I then got together and we looked at what are some best practices, what are the elements here that actually really drive business results, and again, coaching became a really underlying factor. Leadership development was very important, as long as it was constructed as part of a whole systems approach. But the biggest thing is having your leaders engaged and on board. And if your leaders are not engaged, and I have said this to many people who said, well, my boss just simply doesn't care about it. Well, if your boss simply doesn't care about it and he's the CEO of the company, you might have a little problem. And maybe, Marshall always says, and I love this, you have two choices in life. One is to change you or change it. And if you're working for a leadership team that doesn't care about people, my guess is that the rest of the organization is not real red hot anyway, and you're probably not having a lot of fun on your job. So either you change yourself to accept that dynamic, or you change it, which is go look for another job in a place that has, kind of the kind of culture and the kind of leadership characteristics that you want. Or you try to find that shining light on the leadership team that can be a change champion for you. So my final little story for today is, so this one company I was working with, we did all this leadership development. We were really going to train people. We did nothing around the culture. And you know what happened from the training? The leaders found out what it was like to be in a constructive organization and what different kind of leadership practices there were out there. And then they started looking around where they were working and said, oh, this is awful. I knew I didn't like it here, but now I really don't like it here because I know how it can be different. And it actually increased the turnover rate. So, message to you. Think about talent as an absolutely critical, important lever for companies. It is. Most sophisticated CEOs see talent as a critical component of their success. Think about it from a future perspective. Get a whole systems approach. Measure where you are today. Understand where you stand against that benchmark. Take actions to close the gaps. Because some companies will, if you look at a report of some companies, they will perhaps be really great here and even great here, but very weak in terms of their operating system to drive talent and not tracking results. Or they might be really good here and really good here, but they're very poor on assessments, and it gives you a very targeted, very focused way to drive a human capital talent strategy because, oh, by the way, a talent strategy, not just talent activities, is statistically correlated to business results at the end of the day. So that's my message. And I'm happy to answer any questions or any thoughts that you might have, or anything I said that was controversial, or you violently disagree with, or violently agree with.
Yeah. Questions.
Well, one of the things that you'll see in the book, we combine leadership and culture. And when you saw the list of the levers, culture was number 4. Culture was number 1, leadership was number 4. Now the reason that is because leadership and culture are totally intertwined. So what leaders do, in fact, drive the culture. And it's the behaviors that they have every day that you see that speak to the underlying values that they personally don't recognize all the time. But if you have certain leaders with destructive kinds of behaviors, and you're rewarding those behaviors, you're going to get a culture that is, you might as well be a salmon swimming upstream trying to drive this stuff. It's not ever going to go anywhere. But I don't think that was the total point I made that day, was it?
Well, yeah, I think
Similar.
you're saying around how do we use, when we're looking at talent, not just how you do, what you're
Oh,
doing, but how
absolutely. Well, that's the whole, when everybody's looking at the performance versus the potential. And everybody does that, right? Doesn't everybody? Performance and potential. Somewhere in there is that equation. Well, the performance is how well does somebody perform. And that gets back to the point I made about execution. If all you're looking at and all you're saying is somebody is really great at execution, and you're not looking at the people side of the equation and how they do it, you really are going to be driving a culture that is not going to get you at the end of the day to a high performance area at all. And I would propose to you that that is really more where people are today than they should be. But there are some great shining examples, as some of them were in the room last night, who do really well around this, and as a result, they have great talent retention, but are very poor in this particular area. So in other words, they haven't aligned their systems to really be crisp and consistent around that. So leadership for me, which is why I've always focused in on the area of leadership, and I think culture is going to become more and more the key definer for the 21st century, for what's going to make organizations really sing. And, Quentin, this gives me a chance to just say something else about it, which too many times there are organizations and firms out there, and I've used them, who use qualitative approaches to assessing culture. And if you use a qualitative approach, you cannot do the correlation analysis that I've been talking about. And that correlation analysis, that data, sings to any CEO, who most of them have MBAs, they look at data all the time, they look at bar charts, and they do not resonate with, well, I did 25 focus groups and they all said that the leaders need X or whatever it is. Okay, so what? They really perceive that to be very soft information. And in a way it is soft information, because you cannot track that, you cannot measure that, you can't see the change of that over time in a way that's really defensible statistically. So. And I think that the data is, it's just like anything else. Anybody who has ever been in total quality or Six Sigma, you'll get in rooms with people and they will debate, oh, I don't have the right talent. I got to retrofit my people. My people are wonderful. My people are not wonderful. I'm here. I've got the worst team in the world. I got to get rid of everybody. The guy outside is much better. I got to bring them in. You always have these debates. Until you have a very clear set of criteria around which you are making judgments around people, you are always going to have that debate. And it's a Six Sigma approach. And until you have that, and until you have assessed, however you choose to do it, through a 360, not everybody has the resources that I was very lucky to have at HP, but you get some way of measuring people in a defensible way. Now, not to kill people, because then I've also seen companies go in and say, oh my God, I'm going to fire everybody in the place, and that's not good either. But it gives you the baseline to understand what actions you specifically need to take, and then you can measure the change over time. So I'm a big proponent of get the facts, because the facts take the noise out of the system. Without the facts, you're still debating somebody's opinion versus someone else's opinion. So that is typically the approach that I would use. Spread the gamut when you go into Fortune 1000, because there are very few that are the size of GE and HP, and obviously GE and HP were in the mix. There were some companies that were around 6,000 employees. Were actually some private nonprofits in there, some hospitals, retail companies, and most of them, I would say, the revenue was anywhere from maybe 10 billion. Around that. So they were, in the big picture of life, they were, big-ish companies, but we had some smaller organizations that were in the millions, and
so smaller, do you mean 6,000 or do you mean smaller than that?
About 6,000, there were a couple of hospitals that were maybe a couple of hundred. So. Right, that's a great question. I think it falls in two categories. You know, technical skills and performance, right, are two measures. There's a model in the book that's a 4-quadrant model. And there are two measures of what got you here, you know, and they're of past performance. And that is your technical skills, and that is your actual performance. How did you do on the job? The other two measures of potential is how able you are to deal with different cultural aspects. You know, so flexibility, learning agility, and what are your personal behaviors. The world changes so quickly that it's those leadership components, sort of that softer underbelly of your ability to learn. Even if you're a highly skilled technical person, you know as well as I do, the second the Kindle came out, there were like 8 of them, and you know there's going to be more and more of that. So you can't possibly stay on top of the game, but if you are a natural learner, you have huge potential. So it's those ability to work well with people, to be self-reflective, to be a learner, and to adapt to understand respective cultural elements and be able to adjust to that without adjusting your personal value system are really the predictors of potential going forward. Now, when we assess people, interestingly enough, when we interview people, it's very rare that people are interviewed around the two bottom, well, they're not really bottom, it's a circle, but those two particular aspects, which is future growth. It's usually around, think about those of you that interview, it's, you know, what do you do, and what have you done in the jobs, and how well was your performance? It's important, but not as important as the other two. I think every company, and I've come across that as well, and very big companies, by the way, very surprisingly big companies who are very tactical and project driven as opposed to really thinking strategically. There's two questions, and there's a series that we have that are, where do you see this company in 2 or 3 years? Where do you want it to be? And then what's the market conditions that are changing around you? What are your customers requiring and that you're not doing today? And what is the innovation that's going to come slam you in the front of the face? And most leaders will resonate with that. And then you take a look at, okay, now where are you compared to that? And what does that mean that you have to change within your organization? So there's a whole exercise that I take a leadership team through. Now sometimes, you know, you have to understand that people move glacially sometimes. So to be able to move them to at least some area of focus, they will typically be able to say, you know, we do need to change this or that. Many of them have goals, though. Yeah, and again, I think it goes back to, you know, being able to call people on that behavior and understanding what that behavior looks like. Now, I will tell you, in GE, we were very clear on, Jack had the 4 E's. Those 4 E's were very clearly defined. Everybody knew what great looked like around those 4 E's, and everybody knew what not so great looked like. And it's the same, you know, everybody should know what, and we use that at Hewlett-Packard too, a anchored scale, so to speak, of here are the 5 things we need leaders to do, and this is what it looks like when it's really terrific, so that any leader in the world could pick it up and say, I can recognize that, not in psychometric language, not in bazillion competencies and all this stuff that most people will glaze over, but the 5 things that people do that are recognizable, that somebody can say, yeah, my person does this. And then here's what it looks like when it's okay, and here's what it looks like when it's not so good, so that people can recognize that. And then when you have that kind of behavior coming back, you can say, well, where are we on this continuum? What are we doing? Are we here? Are we here? Are we here? Are we sort of a mixed bag? And is that going to help us? But again, having some kind of anchor that people understand gets you out of the box of saying, oh, you're moving back into tactical. And then what happens is somebody says, well, yeah, okay, so, you know, but you don't have any proof, right? See what I'm saying? And that's why when you measure those things, you have to be able to say that. You have to be able to say, these are the characteristics of these people, and we know this. And here's what we just rewarded this year. Is that what you want? Now, we used to do that regularly. But I will tell you, it goes back to, and you hit a very important word. For me, the HR community is the keeper of the culture and the keeper of the organization. And we have a lot of HR people that perhaps don't have the courage, you know, to confront. Either don't have the courage, don't have the skill, and don't know how to do that, perhaps. And you know, it goes back to the circumplex again. You know, if you have a lot of passive HR people, they're not going to confront. And I had a boss that I worked with, and you probably can figure out that, you know, I'm not a shy and retiring type. So I probably wouldn't work well in a very passive culture, but I had a boss that did exactly what the CEO wanted no matter what. Drove me crazy. Now the CEO has ultimately been fired by the board, but that man could have benefited so much with some good coaching and at least some honest dialogue around what he was doing that could have improved his relationship with the board and improved his relationship with the leadership team, because he was brilliant. But the human resource person did not do it for whatever reason. I don't know. So.